Coming up on We Talk News this week, New York State is on the verge of legalization, but it's going to cost you. President Biden continues to take flack for his firing of staffers for past cannabis use. A turnaround for South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem? Plus, is FDA-approved research on weed in the U.S. a waste of time and money? All that, plus state-by-state news on We Talk News, next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's We Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. You know, every week we get reports from all over the U.S. about all the cannabis news from state to state. All eyes this week are on the Empire State of New York, where Bloomberg News is reporting that all sides have agreed in principle to the adult use legalization bill that their governor, Andrew Cuomo, has been pushing over the past few years. The deal will include a 13% sales tax. 9 of that going to the state and the other 4 to local cities and towns. Interestingly, New York will be adding an additional excise tax that is tied to potency of THC in the product. That fee can go up to 3 cents per milligram related to the potency of the THC in the plant or concentrate. Adult sales could begin as soon as 1 year. Now, State Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes provides a great quote in regards to the importance of getting this done. Quote, "We are literally surrounded geographically by other states that are doing it. Because we are New Yorkers, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We could speed this up." Now, granted, I added in a little New York accent there, but that is the quote. Now, one of those states bordering New York is, of course, New Jersey, a state that voted in adult use sales in November. Now, that was just the first step in the adult use market in a legal state. However, there has been already a change in the regulatory board in New Jersey, and race was a factor. Tara Misu Sargenti is our New Jersey correspondent, and she explains. Tara?
From pressure from the NAACP, Governor Murphy took back one of his appointees, William Wallace, from the UCFW union, who's been very supportive of cannabis, and is replacing him now with Charles Barker, who is a former aide to Senator Cory Booker and also a member of Reverend Al Sharpton's National Action Network. Now, this happened, the reason they were pressuring him is because there was a promise within the legislation to appoint someone from a national or state branch from a national organization with a mission of studying, advocating, or adjuncting against the historical oppression of minorities. Okay, so they had not fulfilled that promise. So by appointing Mr. Baker to the board now, they have completed that, and we can now move forward.
One state that's already setting sales records in cannabis is Michigan. That's where you will find Rick Thompson with some of the details. Rick?
Yes, I'm Rick Thompson from MICBD with this week's Michigan report for Weed Talk News. Michigan sold $105 million in cannabis during February, $38.1 million from medical sales, and $67 million in rec sales. That's a 48% jump in medical cannabis sales, although those totals are down from a high sales point of June 2020. The important breakdown is product type. In both medical and adult use markets, flower is the power. Sales of medical flower and trim were almost triple the sales for vape carts at $12 million, and the next largest segment was edibles at $11 million. Flower and shake on the medical side were nearly half of all sales in February and were 56% of all sales in the adult use market last month. I have it on good authority that March's cannabis sales will be a record-setting tally. Some of Michigan's largest cannabis players have taken out costly sale-leaseback loans to jumpstart their businesses, according to a new report. These predatory loans could bring an interest rate of more than 20% by the full maturity of the loans written in a 16-year ironclad contract. The cost of capital is less than 5% in the Canadian market. If federal banking reform or legalization takes place in the U.S., those large players will have put themselves at a terrible disadvantage. Companies reportedly in on the overpay action include Green Peak, Cresco, LiveWell, and Emerald Growth. And that'll do it for this week's Michigan Report. I'm MICBD's Rick Thompson for Weed Talk News.
Harborside out in California is making some more history. This is the dispensary that Steve D'Angelo and his brother Andrew were involved with for years. They, of course, have moved on to changing the world with their last prisoner project. But Harborside was able to procure a $12 million loan from a bank. Coined as a revolving credit facility, this is reportedly the first commercial bank lending deal for a U.S. cannabis company. Now, with the rest of the news from the big cannabis business world, here's Green Market Report's Debra Borchardt from New York. Deborah?
Earnings season is underway as some of the biggest industry names reported fourth quarter and full year numbers. Trulieve announced its revenue grew 111% to $168 million. This beat the average analyst estimate. And for the full year, the company delivered revenue of $521 million. Cresco Labs delivered revenue for the fourth quarter of $162 million. They reported a net loss in the fourth quarter of $23 million. They did beat analyst estimates as well. And for the full year, Cresco delivered revenue of $476 million. That was a 271% increase over 2019. And finally, it was reported that a Manhattan jury found two businessmen guilty of assisting in an elaborate plan to let the California delivery company Ease process transactions without getting flagged by banks. The two businessmen were charged last year with conspiring to defraud merchant banks by tricking them into processing more than $150 million of transactions on behalf of Ease. It's hard to say at this time whether all the dispensaries involved will face any charges. And that's the big news this week. I'm Debra Borchardt from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
Next up on Weed Talk News, we go from the big city of New York to the Green Mountain state of Vermont with their green nurse, Jessilyn Dolan. Jessilyn?
I'm Jessilyn Dolan from Nurse Grown Organics and Vermont Cannabis Nurses, and this is the Vermont Report for Weed Talk News. Vermont continues to wait to hear who will be leading the Cannabis Control Board, crafting and enforcing the state's new adult use cannabis sales. There are two bills currently in the House that could have a major impact on the state's new industry. One is total decriminalization for personal use and dispensation of all drugs, cannabis, psilocybin, and ketamine. If passed, personal drug use would become a civil violation subject to a penalty of not more than $50, waived in exchange for a substance misuse assessment. The other debate is an amendment that could throw a curveball with the state's medical cannabis program. If the bill passes with the current amendments, the Vermont Cannabis Trade Association, a for-profit group, including lobbyists, representing 3 of the 5 medical dispensaries in the state, will have a self-appointed seat on the Cannabis Control Board's advisory board. The Vermont Cannabis Trade Association advocates for the financial well-being of their member businesses. Since the medical program in Vermont should put patients over profits, it's needless to say a balance on the Cannabis Control Board with a for-profit and a nonprofit group like the established Marijuana for Symptom Relief Oversight Committee would be best. As a nurse with the Vermont Cannabis Nurses Association, we urge Vermont residents, please contact your representatives to advocate for patient representation in order to protect the future and quality of the medical cannabis program. So what's the former Heady Vermont CEO doing now? Eli Harrington is now the face of Vermontuana. What do? Well, they are hosting a seed and clone swap in Vermont's Northeast Kingdom on May 29th. Vendor booths may have already sold out. Vermont Cannabis Nurses Association will be in attendance hosting a spring clone drive and cannabis giveaway for Vermont patients in need. That's the Vermont Report. I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse, Jessilyn Dolan, for Weed Talk News.
Checking in on Washington, D.C. and the federal legalization front, President Biden is continuing to take heat from the media regarding the White House policy of firing staffers who admitted to their past cannabis use. Just another example of how tough it will remain to be to change any federal law in cannabis over the next 4 years, despite a campaign pledge by the Democrats to decriminalize it. Now, for more on this story, here's the Vote Pro podcast, Phil Adams, with this week's DC Report. Phil?
Hi, folks. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, and this is the Weed Talk News DC Report. Dozens of Biden administration staffers have been suspended, put on probation, or forced to resign because of their admissions of past cannabis use. Biden's press secretary, Jen Psaki, said in a press briefing that firings will continue as long as marijuana is federally illegal. The firings prompted a congressional response as 30 members of Congress from both parties sent a letter to the president condemning the policy as antiquated and unequal. The letter points out that Vice President Kamala Harris and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg both admitted on the campaign trail to using cannabis in the past, yet neither is facing any consequences. The letter also notes the continuing state legalization movement, saying, quote, "The American people are demanding a change to punitive and harsh cannabis laws that have always been unequally applied." In a separate letter to the White House, GOP Congressman David Joyce of Ohio, a member of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, called the policy, quote, "both arcane and discriminatory." A bipartisan companion bill to the Secure and Fair Banking Act was reintroduced in the Senate this week. This comes less than a week after the Safe Banking Act was refiled in the House. The Senate version is sponsored by Democrat Jeff Merkley of Oregon and Republican Steve Daines of Montana, along with 27 other senators, nearly a third of the upper chamber, as co-sponsors. The bill would allow financial institutions to serve cannabis business clients without fear of federal sanctions that continue to force the industry to operate on a cash basis. In a press release, Merkley called the current policy, quote, "a nonsensical rule that is an open invitation to robbery and money laundering." Daines said in a tweet that the bill would, quote, "reduce crime, create jobs, and boost local economies, a win-win for all." The Congressional Research Service published a report this month examining tax policies that affect the legal cannabis industry. Focusing on IRS Code 280E, which prohibits a number of deductions and credits that are available to other businesses, the CRS notes that the Reagan-era policy was originally aimed at illegal drug trafficking. Today, however, that rule also applies to state legal cannabis businesses, raising their effective tax rate significantly compared to other industries. The report notes that many of the current restrictions could change if certain federal reform bills are enacted. Passing the Safe Banking Act, for example, would allow cannabis businesses to file their taxes electronically, alleviating a huge burden on both the companies and the Internal Revenue Service. Last month, IRS Commissioner Charles Rettig told a House subcommittee the agency would prefer not to have to handle such large cash payments. That's the Weed Talk News DC Report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
In the strange but true category, you'll never believe which governor is now looking to decriminalize cannabis in her state. Sure enough, it's South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, who is introducing decriminalization reform for cannabis in her state. Now, this is the same governor who tried to stop the will of her constituents after they approved both medical and adult use of cannabis at the ballot box in November. Now, she wants to limit home grow to 3 plants per adult instead of the 6 plants that South Dakotans for Better Marijuana Laws has proposed. No such issue in Canada. That's where MJ Biz Daily international reporter Solomon Israel covers that weed beat. Here's Solomon's Canadian Cannabis report. Solomon?
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily International, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Retail sales of recreational marijuana in Canada fell in January, down more than 5% from December. Total sales for the month were nearly 283 million Canadian dollars. In 2020, Canadians spent 2.6 billion Canadian dollars on regulated adult use marijuana. The province of New Brunswick has finally decided not to sell off its government-owned cannabis retail monopoly. New Brunswick started taking private sector bids for the network of 20 Cannabis NB stores in 2019, but now that Cannabis NB has delivered profits for 4 quarters in a row, it will remain in government hands. And federal cannabis regulator Health Canada is launching a review of fees levied upon cannabis producers. Those fees include application fees and fees for security clearances, as well as fees for import-export permits and an annual regulatory fee. The federal government also collects excise taxes from Canadian cannabis growers. You can read those stories and more at mjbizdaily.com. I'm Solomon Israel for Marijuana Business Daily.
This week's factoid, courtesy of MJ Biz Daily's Fact Book. Did you know that for every single dollar that is spent in the legal cannabis market, $2.50 gets injected into the economy? That fact and more available in the MJ Biz Daily Fact Book, available on their website, mjbizdaily.com. We have a new member of the Weed Talk News correspondent staff. It's actually the executive director of the Illinois chapter of NORML. Her name is Margo Veseley. Here's her Illinois report for today.
Hi, my name is Margo Veseley from Margowana with this week's Weed Talk News report for Illinois and the Midwest market. Illinois craft growing scoring is far advanced in the dispensary licenses. As growers' applicants average spending $10,000 a month to maintain properties and its employees, state legislators are optimistic that the rollout will be a lot smoother than the dispensaries. Michigan recreational sales are replacing medical. As expected, recreational sales are beating out medical sales in Michigan. Last July, it was reported with $52.1 million in sales. Last month's report showed $38.1 million. Illinois dipped below its January and December sales numbers last month for a total of $110.3 million. Delta 8 products are on the rise, but are they as safe as they seem when they are almost identical to the federally regulated Delta 9 products? Hemp processors have been extracting Delta 8 to produce products that create a high and exist in a federally legal gray zone. Entrepreneurs are excited, but also show concerns with the legalities. That's the Illinois report. I'm Margo Veseley from Margowana for Weed Talk News.
Finally tonight, a great example of why cannabis research in the United States is so frustrating. Now, you know, the only weed that's officially allowed to be tested in this country is grown at the University of Mississippi. The weed there has between 8 to 12% THC, the intoxicating chemical in the plant. Now, in most legal states, the THC percentage is much higher in the 14 to 25% range. So when Dr. Sue Sisley, a respected researcher from Arizona, started to look at treating PTSD with cannabis grown at the Old Miss facility, many cannabis advocates were hoping that the anecdotal evidence would be supported by this research. Well, it didn't really work out that way. 76 veterans who were diagnosed with PTSD were given a mix of cannabis with THC levels between 8 to 12%, and some were given a placebo. The study concluded that the vets who got the THC weed from Mississippi and those that got the placebo saw very little difference in effect. Now, this study took 7 years to get approved by the FDA, 3 years to conduct the study at a cost of $2.2 million. Right now, this is the only way the FDA will approve a study into the medical benefits of cannabis. So once again, if you really want to study the effects of a product on PTSD, get a good product first, so that study isn't a waste of time and money. That's Weed Talk News for this week. I'm Jimmy Young for Pro Cannabis Media. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. PCM TV is supported by Salient Systems, a world leader in video management security, and by Revolutionary Clinics, a medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry.
Hi, I'm Ben Shire, New England rep for Salient Video Management Systems. Let me tell you what makes us different in the security space. We're your trusted advisors for all your security needs. I know how complicated the regulations are in cannabis, and working with Salient Systems will be the polar opposite of that. I give free consultations and will walk you through every step of the process so that you can get what you need at the price you can afford. We're robust, we're simple and scalable. We're Salient Systems, your solutions to all your security needs. Please contact me at the information below, and I'm looking forward to being your trusted advisor.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.